Welcome, and thank you for joining us for this important Parent Infant Foundation webinar. My name is Ben Curran. I'm campaign manager at the foundation, and I'm delighted to host this webinar today. So this week is Infant Mental Health Awareness Week. Our focus is on asking commissioners, service planners, and policymakers, do they know who is holding the baby? There is a range of Infant Mental Health Awareness Week resources available on our website to help you make the most of this important week. There's a calendar with all the great events that are taking place, template letters that you can use to engage with your local MP, and content to help you share the great stuff that's happening on social media throughout the week. I'm very excited to be joined today by Maya Ellis MP. She's the MP for Ribble Valley and also the chair of the APPG on babies. It's the first time that she's been able to join us for one of our webinars, so we're thrilled that she's found time, particularly given how crucial this week is for MPs with the spending review on Wednesday. I'm also delighted to be joined by the report's three authors, all colleagues from the Parent Infant Foundation, and we'll make sure to have a good Q&A session after they've all spoken, so please use the Q&A function any point throughout the session to get your question in, and we'll do our best to get it answered. So to kick things off and explain the crucial work that teams do, I'm pleased to introduce you to the Foundation's clinical advisor, Dr. Ben Yeo. Ben?
Thank you, Ben. So I'm a child psychotherapist in a parent-infant team based in Lambeth, Cambs called PAIRS. And today, in my role at the Foundation, I'm also representing the other parent-infant teams across the UK. And it's really positive to see that the number of teams has grown over the last 5 years from 27 to 49, with more services in development. This is one of the key findings of today's report. And the growth has been due to local efforts, and the report describes the dedication of local clinicians and commissioners who have tenaciously worked to develop local provision. And this has also been supported by national funding streams such as Start for Life in England. However, we'll hear later how this still leaves huge gaps in provision. Before we delve deeper into the content of today's report, I want to show the difference a parent-infant team can make. The report poses the critically important question, who's holding the baby? And it's parent-infant teams, where we exist, of course, who work closely with parents, with practitioners, with local early years systems, and with babies themselves to improve outcomes. The best way to show this is through the perspective of the baby, an experience that is so central to the work of parent-infant teams. So with that in mind, I want to introduce a 5-month-old baby who I'm going to call Billy. And he's typical of a baby referred to a parent-infant team. Now, along healthy developmental lines, you'd expect the needs of a 5-month-old baby to be filling the room. The cries, the laughter, the distress, the early prototype language, the interactions. But when I joined the health visitor on my first home visit to see Billy, what I came across was a quiet, withdrawn, disconnected baby who was struggling to make eye contact with the adults around him. To give some context, Billy's mother had been a victim of domestic abuse. She'd had to escape the home during pregnancy, and after spending time in a homeless hostel, had been placed in temporary accommodation. Billy's mother herself had adverse childhood experiences. And in this way, there were multiple layers of trauma impacting on her development. Billy's mother described feeling scared to be alone with her baby. He reminded her of the abusive relationship and the violent circumstances in which he'd been conceived. Billy was living in a state of fear and distress and was showing signs of early trauma and relational withdrawal. Thankfully, the health visitor made a referral to our parent-infant team. She'd actually attended infant mental health training that was offered by our team, so she was able to recognise that Billy was in distress rather than an easy, compliant baby, which he could easily have been mistaken for. The home visits where I observed Billy and his interactions or lack of interactions formed part of an initial assessment. Following this, the multidisciplinary team at PAIRS recommended a treatment of parent-infant psychotherapy Alongside this, Billy's mother was offered practical support from a children's centre worker and the specialist health visitor. There was now a team around Billy and the parent-infant relationship. The parent-infant psychotherapy treatment included Billy and his mother together. The therapeutic space enabled Billy's mother to begin to disentangle her past traumatic experiences with the baby that she had in the here and the now. She became more attuned and responsive to Billy's needs. His needs no longer triggered her own trauma and distress. And over time, Billy actually felt able to communicate his distress. In fact, he became more demanding and more of a handful, which was healthy and developmentally appropriate. He made eye contact, his face became more animated. He initiated play, he cried. Safe in the knowledge that his mother was increasingly able to respond to his needs. The improvements in the parent-infant relationship made Billy's mother feel happier. The worry and guilt about not being a good enough mother lifted. Previously, she'd not felt able to attend a children's centre, but she now began accessing stay and play sessions, which in turn helped Billy's development. I'm delighted that by his first birthday, Billy was far more communicative. His language had developed and he made himself heard. Billy had moved from a state of trauma onto a healthy developmental trajectory. And this is the difference that a parent-infant team can make. From Billy to the wider picture. Another report from the Parent-Infant Foundation shows how parent-infant teams can positively impact across 3 domains: parent-infant relationships, the mental health of caregivers, and of course, babies' development. The development in Billy's language is an important reminder for us that when we're thinking about the government's opportunities mission about learning in young children, the building blocks for that learning is the earliest parent-infant relationships, something that is so core to the work of parent-infant teams. Many of us here today will know about or even work in parent-infant teams, but I'm conscious that there's lots of people who are new to the work of teams. So I'd like to give a brief overview of the defining features. Parent-infant teams are multidisciplinary. So my team in Lambeth has a social worker, child psychotherapists, systemic family therapists. Other teams will have clinical psychologists, health visitors, midwives, and so on. Teams are typically led by a senior and experienced consultant clinical psychologist or psychotherapist, and staffed by practitioners with an in-depth knowledge of infant mental health. This is essential to understand and respond to the needs of the most vulnerable babies like Billy. The focus of teams is the baby. Indeed, some teams are actually called infant mental health teams. And teams in the NHS will typically be located in child services such as CAMS. Crucially, all of the parent-infant relationships around the baby are in focus. Teams are not limited to working with mothers, but any caregivers around the baby. And sometimes we say that our patient is the parent-infant relationship. Teams typically accept referrals from pregnancy up to the age of 2, the first 1001 days. And some teams like mine in Lambeth work with children up to the age of 5. Teams offer direct parent-infant relationship support, assessment, and intervention for families. We heard how parent-infant psychotherapy was offered to Billy and his mother. Teams will also offer a range of other evidence-based interventions, such as video interaction guidance, therapeutic parent-baby groups, and so on. Crucially, these are individualised programmes tailored around the needs of the most vulnerable babies. And when we're talking about those most in need, recent and as yet unpublished research commissioned by NHS England suggests that 19% of babies between 0 and 2 will have a mental health need. And this figure rises sharply in areas of deprivation. And these figures are similar to the decades of attachment research, which suggests that at least 15% of babies are at risk of disorganised attachment. Coming back to teams, we have clear referral pathways which enable babies and their families to access specialist support. We also play a vital role in linking up with other services, creating a wider team around the baby. For instance, Parent-infant teams often work closely with perinatal mental health teams. In Billy's case, I consulted with my colleagues in the perinatal team. Billy's mother didn't meet the threshold for the perinatal service, whose primary focus is adult mental health. But Billy and his mother's relational needs were serious and complex, and this met the threshold of a parent-infant team. Finally, parent-infant teams are expert advisors and champions in the local workforce. We do this by offering advice, training, consultation, and supervision. So the health visitor who referred to our service is an example of this. The infant mental health training she received helped her to identify Billy's needs. I'm going to share a quote from a parenting worker who attended one of our reflective practice supervisions at Lambeth Pairs. She says, 3-year-olds throwing temper tantrums would take more attention than the baby just lying quietly in a cot all day. Because they're not crying, people think they're fine, but actually it's the not crying that's the problem. So I think it's definitely been helpful to shift that focus and to think more about the babies and to bring them more in mind when they would normally get lost. So that's a whistle-stop tour of parent-infant teams. We started today with the perspective of the baby. I'd like to finish with the perspective of parents by sharing an important video made by Blackpool Parent-Infant Relationship Service, another NHS parent-infant team. After the video, I'm going to hand over to Maya Ellis, but I just wanted to give some background to the video. So be prepared that the content in the video is quite disturbing with parents in distress. And the video is co-produced with parents who have had specialist support to overcome difficulties in their parent-infant relationship. And teams like Blackpool and Lambeth show how it takes leadership and investment from the NHS and local authorities to scale up parent-infant teams. Thank you.
I did have a bit of an up and down pregnancy. I felt like I wouldn't be able to cope and maybe didn't want her anymore, and I didn't know whether I wanted to be here anymore either.
I was petrified that I would treat my child like my parents treated me. I wasn't looking forward to having the baby.
I couldn't have that confidence in myself because I didn't recognise when she wanted feeding or when she wanted to be changed. It made me feel like I'm not a good mum.
I remember it, that realisation almost of this is my life now. And then I feel guilty myself because I'm getting frustrated at him and I know it's not his fault. I knew I didn't want to get to the stage where I resented him.
I broke down. I just had enough.
I spoke to my midwife,
My healthcare visitor,
My social worker.
And she decided that PERS team would be the best for me and my baby.
it stands for Parent and Infant Relationship Service.
I don't do very well with new people at first, but she's like a friend.
She will come round, she'll have a brew, there's never a rush. I'm not okay, basically.
We did a lot of talking. It really helped.
we mapped out who I am as a person and why I am as a person and how I can feel good enough in both motherhood and life.
We worked on recognising which cries which.
I was quite proud that I made that little brain is developing because of me.
As cringy as it can be sometimes to watch yourself back on the video, it highlights things that you don't necessarily notice at the time.
What's that fairy thing?
She doesn't need everything that we're stressing over.
Yeah.
I've realised that I am doing a good job.
Part of it is adjusting to being a parent. You find a new version of yourself, I think.
I'm not my mother, I'm not my parents, and I am good enough.
It's nice to have that bond. I feel really confident to be around her.
I don't know where I would be now if I hadn't have said I need some help and got the help that I've got.
It was the best thing that could have happened for me and my baby. I feel like she's got a better mum.
Thank you. That's a enormously powerful video, and thank you to Blackpool Pairs for giving consent for us to share that, and I'd encourage you to share it far and wide. I'm now going to hand over to Maya Ellis MP, who's the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Babies, Pregnancy to Age 2.
Thank you, Ben. And gosh, I have to follow that. I feel emotional after watching videos like that because I don't think anyone who's been in those first few months after having a baby wouldn't feel a little bit emotional watching something like that, because it is, it's such a huge transition, and where we have such inconsistent support for that transition, that's why we're all here, I'm sure. So I'm Maya Ellis. I'm the MP for Ribble Valley up in Lancashire, and as Ben said, I'm also the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Babies. So I'm just going to talk a little bit today on kind of my background and why I've come here, a little bit on what an APPG is and what we're trying to do with it as we take it forward in this new Parliament, and a bit of the issues that we're kind of, we're tackling at the moment. Just to give you that context, I guess, from a national point of view of, a lot of this work happens on the ground and happens through everyone on this call, the incredible effort you put in. But obviously some of the things happen or don't happen depending on how policy is shaped and, where funding goes to. So just want to give you a bit of a sense of where that's all at. It's incredible to see. I think we've got 240 attendees on this call at the moment, which is a wonderful thing to see, because, for me, this is the most important issue that we have, because everything starts here, and if we get this right and if we're brave enough to invest at this early stage, then an awful lot of the challenges that happen further down the line in society would be, drastically reduced. But that said, historically, it has been a challenge to get this at the top of the agenda. And certainly for myself, I became an MP in the elections last year. And I wanted to be an MP because babies, working families, all parents were not talked about enough in policy, from what I could tell. And honestly, it still feels a little bit like an uphill battle sometimes, because I think MPs are pulled in every different direction. But that said, there are, I would say, little shoots of real hope, which I'll talk through in a minute, of kind of things that I think we can latch onto and really kind of emphasise and build on to make sure that the case for babies is made everywhere and as strongly as possible over the next few years in this new government. So I represent Ribble Valley, which is a constituency in Lancashire, which is relatively low deprivation, although we have some parts of the outskirts of Preston, which do have some deprivation there. But nevertheless, there's still challenges across the piece in terms of health visitor services declining, ups and downs in kind of maternity services, although we do have some really good practice here, but then that's about sort of protecting what we've got and making sure it doesn't disappear in ever increasing challenging circumstances. We're under Lancashire and South Cumbria Trust, and they've been working on a mental health for babies and children strategy. So there's lots of sort of interesting work that's being developed here, because I think we've got some really ambitious and innovative maternity services and health services in this space. So lots of really passionate people trying to do some good work. We have, there's some interesting challenges that come up in this area that I've come across locally. We have an incredible kind of grassroots charity here called Tippy Toes, which is it is a family hub, but it's not a publicly funded one. It's mainly from charity, what's really interesting to me in spaces like that is that they they've recognised the need for understanding the community and being people who the community recognise. So we've talked about sort of a fear of lanyards and kind of how we kind of get around that and how we make sure that people feel safe accessing services. So that's something that I'm really interested in. And again, you know, really emotional hearing some of the stories that Ben was talking about. We had the case just down the road here of Kiana Dawes, which was a really tragic case where she took her own life following domestic violence, and there was a little baby involved there. So kind of, you know, the other end of the scale of kind of where people are in such difficult circumstances that they're experiencing, and how we make sure that, for sure, parents, but, you know, the babies within those circumstances are looked after and not left behind. We've had a few casework cases here where we've almost found, you know, babies and families really struggling that have just been missed by the system. So, you know, every day I'm reminded of how critical and important this work is. So as an APPG, it's an all-party parliamentary group. There are lots of them. They work as cross-party groups. So we have MPs from all the different parties working together to look at sort of future policy and how we can shift those things. So we've been working, one of the things that we've been doing for the first sort of 6 months or so is just trying to get our heads around where policy's at in the sector. So I've been having great conversations with people like Andrea Leadsom, who was previously in the Conservative government doing a lot of this work in this space. Also been chatting with Naomi Eisenstadt, who some of you may know, who was one of the civil servants leading on Sure Start when it first came about, and she's now an advisor to both the Department of Health and Department for Education, which is a delight that she's there, because she's certainly got the knowledge. I've recently become chair of the Foundation Years Information and Research charity, which some of you may know, led by Nick Pesey. So looking at how we can bring real, you know, academics into this space. And with all of that, we basically then use that to raise, you know, the needs of babies in Parliament, working out the levers, working out how we can best persuade. So some of the next steps we're looking at doing or have done very recently, Ashley Dalton is currently the Minister for Health, who looks after early years health and wellbeing. So she is going to meet with the all-party parliamentary group later this month. So that'll be the first opportunity we've got to really grill her on what the plans are and what conversations are happening in that space. From informal conversations with Ashley, I know that there are lots of conversations underway about the work we do in this space. I know particularly she's been speaking to Stephen Morgan, who is the Minister for Early Years over in the Department for Education, on early years nutrition. And so there's lots of conversations happening. We also, you may be aware that the spending review announcements are coming this Wednesday. So that's kind of, obviously, a lot of the more challenging parts of the budget were announced in October, because that's about where we're going to tax and where we're going to sort of bring money in. The announcements on Wednesday are about what we're going to spend. It will also maybe include some cuts for certain departments, but we're quite hopeful that we will get some good news around this space. We don't know exactly what, but I will say that, you know, even, I don't know if you saw, Rachel Reeves wrote a piece in the Observer this weekend. You know, one thing that I would observe from some of the pieces that Rachel has written is that there's a quiet feminism in a lot of the stuff she does, and not that this is, obviously, it's not only a women's issue, this space, but often it is a feminist issue. And I think she speaks really strongly about children and opportunity, and I think she is quietly feeding that into everything she does. So that gives me a lot of hope. So on that basis, we wrote a letter just last week to Rachel Reeves, just sort of reconfirming our commitment to this space. We managed to get that signed by the chairs of the all-party parliamentary groups for almost all the groups that are in this space. So there are ones on infant feeding, on flexible working, things like that. So we've managed sort of reinforcing that message as she's making those final decisions, because as we know, sometimes spending review decisions go up to the wire the night before. I think Gordon Brown sometimes used to do them the night before, famously. So so we never know, but we'll keep pushing until those decisions are sort of set in stone. And then after that, depending on what comes out of that spending review, we will take some time to take stock, see where we're at. We hope that we will get some wins. The APPG has been campaigning quite hard around Start for Life and kind of looking at how we can roll that out nationally. But whatever comes out of it, we will then pick up and see either, you know, what we can push back on if we think some stuff should change in future, or what within those settlements we can do to make sure that this policy in this area progresses. Couple of other things that are happening policy-wise. We were absolutely delighted that the Health and Social Care Select Committee, which is the committee that sits outside of the government and cabinet but scrutinises that department's work, they decided to do a first 1001 days inquiry. So that's brilliant, and we've kind of spoken to them, offering our support to carry that on, because once they do that report, that essentially goes to government, and it's up to government what they do with it. I'm really keen that we keep pushing on, build on that work that they've done, and keep making sure that whatever comes out of that inquiry, is heard in government and we don't let it lie. Members of the APPG on babies in the Lords have been putting some amendments into the Schools and Wellbeing Bill, like I said, particularly around sort of rolling out Start for Life and family hubs nationally, also looking at improving data collection and work around the social care workforce. And what else have I got on my list to share with you? I think we've covered most of the things there. Obviously, we've got the 10-year plan for the NHS, which will also be coming out later this month. We've got a mental health strategy, and which will hopefully some of the 10-year plan will have more clarity on maternity services as well. So I'm not sure how much time I've got. I'll probably leave it there in a minute, but just to say a couple of quick final things. One is that MPs really listen to their constituents, and I think the biggest thing I've learned in my first year here is that we have to make noise in this space. Even with, I think we've got 41% women MPs now, MPs are still pulled in every direction, and I think we have to make sure that these kind of issues are on the agenda and heard about. So start petitions, write to your MPs, build arguments, have ready-made arguments ready, do media on this stuff, because the more noise there is about babies and about the needs and importance of babies and families, the more that government have to take it seriously. So that's my biggest ask to you all here. I will keep learning from you and all the work that you do, and I'm so grateful to everyone on this call, this report, for keeping this on the agenda and keeping us at the cutting edge of understanding how this impacts. But for me, I will sort of work alongside you, and ultimately the critical thing here for me is that babies and families, if we invest at this stage now, everything else flows from that. And so that will be my motivation to keep trying to get change in this space. Thank you. Sorry, and I'm meant to be handing over to Wook Hamilton, who's the Parent Infant Foundation's Head of Development, to talk through the report. Thank you, Wook.
Lovely. Thank you, Maya. So yes, I am delighted to be talking about some of the findings from this report today. Who's Holding the Baby is, we've just launched it. I'm going to tell you specifically about some of the practice findings and some of the recommendations that have come from that, before handing over to Tamora, who will talk through some of the policy implications and funding implications. So just to contextualise it, this is what we did. We started off at the end of 2023 doing a survey of the teams that are in our network. You'll have seen that map in Ben's presentation. There are teams all over the UK. And we invited them to answer a series of questions about their practice, who they saw, how they reached babies, who they worked with in the wider system, who funded, who commissioned them. We then sought, after that, we sought some kind of service examples to illustrate some best practice in particular areas. And as part of the report, there are some case studies. So we can really kind of look in depth at the way that some of these teams have developed, and are really reaching far and wide and meeting the needs of some of the most vulnerable babies. So first question then we asked was about the age range. So what has happened in the UK is that there's an increasing offer for the 0 to 5 age group, which means that there's kind of some shifting parameters for parent-infant teams. So on the left there is a table which shows you basically what it's showing is two things. The orange dots represent the highest age of referral, and the blue dots is the lowest age. So what you can see is that about half of the teams that we surveyed do offer a 0 to 2 service, and the other half offer a service which goes up either to 3, 4, 5, 6, and in one case 7, I believe. Most teams, however, did offer a service to parents before the baby was born. A few didn't, as you can see, although I know that there's a lot of work in some teams that aren't to kind of make sure that that offer is present. So one of the things that we found when we asked people to kind of comment on that is that it's important to think about how some of those teams are expanded. And there were some comments that some of the needs of the 0 to 2s can be overlooked. So one of the recommendations we made from this is that when mental health services are commissioned for the 0 to 5 age group, that it's the specialist and unique nature of the 0 to 2 service needs to be protected. And that's really because the referral pathways are different. The clinical expertise is different, so they need to be seen as different and commissioned as such. We would also recommend that services do extend the antenatal period, so that they can reach babies as early as possible. So the next question we asked was about the interventions that are used, and Ben has already mentioned some of those interventions. And what this table shows is kind of the top 12. There was a huge range of interventions offered by parent-infant teams. But I guess what we could see came through from this is that most teams offered some kind of video interaction work. They offered some kind of long-term therapeutic work, like parent-infant psychotherapy, and they also offered group options. And you can see some of the top ones there that are offered as self-security, watch me play, and many teams also offered some of the observational kind of interventions like the NBAS and the NBO. So moving on from there, before I move on, just to say, many of these interventions have got a strong evidence base. However, some of those much loved and much used interventions need a stronger evidence base. So we recommend that there's more research into those interventions so we can build up the evidence base for interventions that clinicians know that really work with families. Moving on then to the indirect work with the wider system. So we asked about this, and Ben has already referred to that in the work in Lambeth. This model here shows the kind of way that teams work. So you can see at the highest level of need is where there'll be direct work with families. But in the lower levels of need, there's also a lot of work, but it's a light touch work more to the workforce. And this is a really important part of the work that teams do. And what we saw is that thousands, as you can see, I haven't filled in the blank there, but there are thousands and thousands of professionals reached through both consultations, offering up consultations to practitioners around a family they're seeing, to offer supervision or effective practice groups, and also training. So this work is an incredibly important part of the work of teams. And one of the recommendations we made is that this work is demonstrated through collection of outcomes data, and it's reported to commissioners. And that's a line of practice that's increasing around the UK. Teams are getting much better at finding ways to speak about this element of the work and demonstrate how important it is. And I think the Ben's case study that he shared with you earlier on really shows that unless those practitioners who are who've got babies in front of them, like health visitors, can understand how to identify when there's a need, when there's a problem, then referrals won't come through. So it's a critical part of the work. So some other areas we were interested in is, excuse me, how do teams go about reaching some of those vulnerable babies, the most vulnerable babies? We know you don't just set up a team and referrals come through. And And what we've got is some absolutely excellent examples of some of the ways that babies have been reached. And I'm just going to talk about a couple of those now, but there are many examples in the report. So I'm going to talk about babies in the, how some teams reach babies in the child protection system. First of all, we asked the question, do you take referrals? Most teams did, and some teams less so. What you find in teams that they're placed in different parts of the system, and have got different relationships with those kind of agencies around them, and it really depends a lot on that. So some teams will have pathways set up to work specifically with social care. Some teams had representatives on pre-birth panels, so babies at risk of going into care at birth would have the optimum opportunity to kind of stay with their parent through the the offer of support and intervention. So we would really recommend that vulnerable babies are reached through the development of these dedicated pathways. And it involves a lot of work. It involves relationship building and working closely with other professionals in the system. Another area we looked at, and also mentioned by Ben, is perinatal mental health teams. So we're interested to understand how perinatal mental health services and parent-infant relationship services work together. And it was very, very different across the country. There is obviously overlapping work between the two teams. And what we found, and you can see by the table on the right there, is just under half had quite well-developed shared pathways with their local perinatal team. Some of that involved shared reflective space. And of course, the other half didn't seem to have a kind of a protocol between the two teams. Although for many, they were still receiving a lot of referrals and having shared clients. So from that, it's, this work is developing, it's under development, but we really recommend that shared pathways are developed between parent, infant and perinatal mental health teams. And that will ensure that babies get the support they need from the best possible place, and working together. Finally then, infant voice. So what infant voice is something that, again, Ben talked about, kind of how do we bring the perspective of the baby into work? And we asked teams about this, all of whom said this was absolutely central to their work. And there's a few examples that they gave. A goal-based measure for babies somebody was developing. Somebody commented that all the team are trained in observational tools, so they know how to observe the baby and try to think about their perspective. And also some quite practical examples came forward about voice of the child statements in communication with professionals. When there's a team around the family, for instance, some teams have developed a way of writing from the baby's perspective. So there are numerous examples, but of how infant voice is getting more brought into the work. A related question here is about whether clinical records are kept in the infant's name or the parent's name. And this varies a lot according to teams, and of course according to databases. It can come up against all sorts of sticky problems in databases. But what we did include that in the recommendation, that if possible to hold the clinical record in the name of the baby. This enables the baby to be seen, for work to be accountable, and also for those records to be part of that baby's kind of life record going forward, which can be a really important part of empowering that baby as they grow into adulthood. So I'd like to thank all those fantastic parent-infant teams who took part in this research. And it's really their practice that is showing us what it means to truly hold the baby. I encourage you to have a look at the report and delve into some of those service examples at the back, where you can see in detail how some of those teams have tackled this important question of how they reach and hold babies. Thank you. I would like now to hand over to Tamora, who's going to pick up some of the other findings from the report.
Thanks ever so much. Okay, last presentation, and then we're going to have 10 minutes for questions at the end. So yeah, do please carry on putting them in the chat. So I'm just going to talk finally about what our research has discovered in terms of how teams are funded and how they're commissioned, and what that means for policymakers, and what is it that we want to see from the government. Hopefully you can see this. This sets out where teams get their funding from, and the main source of funding you can see here from the 43 teams that answered our survey was that health is the largest source of funding. So in England, that might be an integrated care board, or it might be a mental health trust. In Scotland, of course, every health board has some dedicated funding for infant mental health, which is great. In rural areas, Highlands and Islands, they might just have enough funding for one professional, but then in the more populous areas, so Edinburgh, in Glasgow, Lanarkshire and Fife, each of those areas have a full parent-infant relationship team that you can see on our map of teams, and those are funded by health. So the second most common source of funding is public health. So in England, that's money that's channeled through local authorities. And thirdly is Start for Life. So although Start for Life funding is mainly used for universal level parent-infant relationship support, so those are services designed to support a lower level of complexity and need, the guidance does say local areas can go further and use it also to expand specialist support. So 12 specialist teams told us that they receive funding from Start for Life. And then the other important sources listed here are charitable funding, so notably A Better Start, National Lottery Community Fund. And also you can see hopefully here that a few teams get funding from social care. But looking at that a bit more closely, teams mostly don't have a single source of funding. Most teams in our survey got funding from more than one source. So you might think there's advantages from having more than one funder because diversification can spread risk, but that does come with disadvantages too. If the funding is really short term or unpredictable, it makes it much harder to plan and harder to recruit and retain staff. And also, particularly for smaller services, trying to patch together small pots of money, think about the amount of professional time and resource that's getting wasted because the future funding is not secure. So sadly, although our overall finding is that the number of teams has grown over the last 5 years, we've also seen a couple of teams close recently following funding challenges, and that's why we think it's really important there's a consistent, sustainable source of funding for teams to develop more services. Is there still a baby blind spot? Well, this is something that really came to light back in our report called Rare Jewels back in 2019. And the baby blind spot is really important as a concept because it shows the challenge that babies have making their voices, their needs heard. So back in 2019, the Parent Infant Foundation undertook some freedom of information research and found that 40%, 42% exactly of local areas didn't accept referrals for babies aged 0 to 2. The NHS long-term plan, which is just for England, also published in that same year in 2019, that drew attention to this problem, and it promised to extend mental health services to create a comprehensive offer for 0 to 25-year-olds. And that plan actually says the NHS plays a crucial role improving the health of children from pregnancy, birth and the early weeks of life, supporting their essential physical, cognitive development before they start school. So we did hope that 5 years on, we might have seen an improvement. And so in March of last year, we sent freedom of information requests again to the 50 mental health trusts that are responsible for child and adolescent mental health services in England to find out if there was still a large baby blind spot. We did find some improvement. 5 years later, it's 20% of trusts, so only 1 in 5 now that don't accept referrals for 0 to 2s. But when you look at those trusts, most of them, 19 of them, get less than 10 referrals for 0 to 2s a year. So really very small numbers of babies being seen in CAMHS. So there's clearly more work to do there, bearing in mind that we estimate that there's 56,000 babies leaving hospital a year at risk of disorganised attachment. Now, that doesn't mean that those are the only babies getting support, of course. As colleagues have already said, some babies will be helped through perinatal, some will be helped through voluntary sector services, some will be helped through other local authority services. But the challenge is not knowing how many. So we don't know the gap between the need and how many babies are being reached because it's not recorded consistently, not normally recorded on those babies' NHS record. So we don't know who, if anybody, is holding the baby. And that's why our focus is on calling on government, on policymakers to improve accountability, make sure that we are reaching babies who need support. And with a new 10-year plan for health due later this month, we submitted evidence to the government recommending they set a target to try to reach 60,000 vulnerable babies over the next 5 years. So that's one of the recommendations of the report that we're publishing today. It's about time we put babies' needs on an equal footing, and sometimes that takes a hard target to make sure that services everywhere have got a good focus on reaching them. And then on Wednesday, in the spending review, which is going to set the department's budgets for the next 3 years, we've called for national rollout of the Family Hubs and Start for Life programme, which would cost 756 million over 3 years. And it is important, this national rollout, because mainly we are talking about universal services here. So every baby should be able to access those services. And in particular, we'd like to see a portion of that money dedicated, ring-fenced to parent-infant teams so that every local authority can have at least one parent-infant team. And you'll know well the economics. It does pay off. It is a good investment to invest in babies. And that's why for every £1 that was spent on Sure Start, the government found they got £2 back. We are really keen to try to alleviate some of the costs of intervening too late. Estimates of the cost of perinatal depression that's untreated every year put that over £8 billion a year. And nearly three quarters of that, by the way, actually is about the adverse impacts on the child. So really, this is a sensible investment. Last month, we published another analysis that we'd commissioned, which found that supporting parent-infant relationships could save the UK 900 million a year. So there's a sound economic case as well as a really strong moral case for investing in babies. And then lastly, we have great hopes that the opportunity mission will translate into better opportunities for vulnerable babies. So the aim of giving every child the best start in life is a brilliant aim, but what is not yet quite as clear as we'd like is to know whether ministers realise just how important it is to invest in those critical first 1,001 days and not leave it until children start school. But thanks to Maya and her colleagues across the parties in both House of Commons and also the House of Lords, that is a point that's regularly being made now in Parliament. And so we hope to see more cross-departmental working with both the Department for Education and the Department for Health, each doing their bit so that babies don't fall through the gaps anymore. So please do read the policy recommendations. They're on page 25 of our report, and that includes in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And please do get involved in raising the profile of babies and contacting your local elected representatives.
Thank you, Tamora, and thank you to all of the speakers for their contributions. Hopefully, like me, you found that emotional at times, inspiring at times, and at other times you just felt that just needs to change. And I know you'll all want to know more, so we'll move on to the question and answer session now. Please do use the Q&A function to ask your question. We may not get to them all today, but what we will do is get written answers for the questions that we don't deal with here and share them on our website. So we will get all your questions answered. So please, like I say, use the Q&A function to get those in. The first question that we've had is from an anonymous attendee. And it says, with the clustering and eventual merging of ICBs across the UK, how do we ensure that the parent-infant teams that do exist aren't diluted or worse, decommissioned, with a view of equity of provision across a new geographical area? Ben and Wook, that's probably one for either of you.
Sorry, I was wondering who's going to jump in there. It's a good question, and it's an important risk to highlight, I think. I think what's still missing, I mean, despite the growth in teams and the fantastic practice we've talked about, what's missing is a mandate from government in policy and funding, and that's what we need, as Tamora said. Without that, then I think that risk is quite a real one, and as we said, we have seen teams folding before. We don't want to see that again. So thank you for raising that. We'll keep banging the drum, and with Maya's help, hopefully we'll we'll get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Wook. Right, the next question we'll look at more of a policy-focused question. So again, it's from an anonymous attendee. Most of the parent-infant teams in existence now have been funded by local commissioners. What are the levers that we need to pull to ensure a wider rollout of parent-infant teams, and how do we pull those levers? Maya, is that something that you would like to comment on, and maybe tomorrow as well?
Yeah, I'm gonna try, but maybe it's more I guess it's these different levels of where this all sits. And I think, similar to Wook's point, there's an element of, government having a better understanding of this space and therefore putting a kind of a mandate around it. It's interesting, I was just skimming through the questions as well and noticed there was a question from someone in Lancashire as well about, I'm still in the process of mapping out kind of what's happening in Lancashire space so that I can kind of get a more nuanced nuanced sense of how this sort of flows through locally. So I think I don't know the answer. I'm keen to sort of get into the detail of that and work it through. I think it is, again, about putting that pressure on MPs, to put the pressure on ministers. One of the things that I think has come up a bit is around this data point and around, I know that that there's a dual pressures of trying to reduce the number of KPIs that are sitting around a lot of, the health service now, so that we are really clear what our key aims are, but that there's a risk that then we lose KPIs around some of these things that we don't want to drop. So I certainly think it's putting pressure on MPs to make sure that these kind of issues keep on the agenda within that 10-year plan. That's not a very clear answer, but that's where I'm at right now, I guess, with that thinking. But I think I'm keen to understand that more to see what we can do.
Tamora, do you want to add anything to that?
Only to say that as it's Infant Mental Health Awareness Week, we have set out an MP toolkit. So there are emails there ready for you to contact your MP. And if you've got any questions about how to do that, please do contact us.
Thank you both. So I'll take the next question from Una McFadden. Does the involvement of these teams provide earlier identification of neurodiversity in infants and parents? Is that something for you, Ben?
Thanks, Ben, and thanks, Una. I don't think that was a specific question that was posed as part of this research. Just checking in with Wook about that. But it's just it's central to the developing practice of parent-infant teams. So yes, I would say kind of going forward, that needs to be, how do we make services accessible to different groups of parents, whether it's kind of neurodiversity, whether it's kind of marginalized, minoritized groups. And I know that's going to be a real kind of future focus for us at the Parent Infant Foundation, but I'm not aware of specific information on that. Just checking with Wook though.
It's an important question, and I think these are what I'd say for now. Yeah.
Okay, thank you both. And probably the last question we'll get to today is again from an anonymous attendee. But the question is, what are the barriers between shared pathways between PAIRS and PNMH teams, so perinatal mental health? Ben, is that again one for you probably?
Absolutely. I think it looks different in different areas across the UK, and I know that that's going to be a real focus for us as part of our exciting plans to develop a national parent-infant relationship framework, where one of the focuses of that project is around the interface between perinatal and parent-infant. I mean, fundamentally, you've got two slightly different but connected points of focus, with a perinatal team looking at the mental health of adults and a parent-infant team thinking about the baby, young child, and all of the relationships around them. I know that in Lambeth and in South London and Maudsley, there's developing, good practice around shared pathways and collaboration. And I know that the Who's Holding the Baby report also features some case studies about where there's a real kind of strong joint working collaboration between those two kinds of teams.
Thank you very much, Ben. And thank you to all the speakers for their contributions today and for taking time to answer some questions. Like I say, we will get answers to the other questions that have been submitted and share those through our website. Thank you everyone for taking time out of your day to join our webinar through this lunchtime. I hope you found it both useful, insightful, and also inspiring. And hopefully we can see who's holding the baby in your area. If you're wondering what you can do to help, particularly as it's Infant Mental Health Awareness Week, there are a few things. Firstly, as Tamora mentioned in the answer to one of the questions, you can go to our website and access our resources to help you engage with your local MP so that we can they know it's a priority for their local constituents and can hopefully put pressure onto ministers and key departments. You can share our IMHAW related posts throughout the week. You can find us on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and Twitter. And if you want to see where there are teams at the moment and where there aren't, you can go on to the map on our website at the parentinfantfoundation.org.uk. And of course, if you're a commissioner and want to know how you can help to hold vulnerable babies in your area, we do have a commissioning toolkit that can help you commission services and provide vital support that babies needs. So thank you very much again for joining us today. And that brings our webinar to a close. Thank you.